Good morning. My name is Audra Kester-Thomas with the Maricopa Association of Governments, or MAG. Thank you for joining us to learn more about Momentum, our region's transportation plan. It will serve as our long-term blueprint for our future transportation system, and we're looking forward to receiving your feedback. Continuing to plan for and invest in our transportation system will ensure you and future generations can get to the places you need to go. Next slide. Today's presentation will include an introduction to MAG, provide some history on our region's transportation investments, and present draft scenarios for your transportation future, where we'll ask you to pick your path. If you have questions during today's presentation, please submit them using the Q&A feature in Zoom. We'll be answering these questions at the end of today's presentation. But let's first start by talking a little bit about MAG. Next slide. MAG provides a forum for local government to work together on issues that affect lives of everyone in the greater Phoenix region. We are a regional agency that conducts planning and makes important policy decisions for our future. MAG serves as the designated metropolitan planning organization for this large region, and that means our core business is transportation. Our job is to develop a long-term regional transportation plan, guiding how our region spends its transportation dollars. As you can see, this is a particularly difficult challenge for a region as large and diverse as ours. Next slide. Our region has a proud history of pulling together to invest in our transportation system. Next slide. In 1985, our mayors came together and asked voters to support a 20-year half-cent sales tax to fund transportation in the region. Voters overwhelmingly passed Proposition 300 in 1985 and then extended the tax another 20 years with Proposition 400 in 2004. As you can see with this map, these investments have played a large part in shaping our region. Combined, these propositions have delivered Loop 101, Loop 202, Loop 303, our light rail, and contributions to a growing multimodal network, an investment that today totals over $12 billion. Not shown on this map are important arterial roadway projects and regional bus transit that is also currently supported by Proposition 400. Many of you may remember that Maricopa County's early transportation system consisted of Interstate 17, portions of US 60, and local roads. Today, Maricopa County has more than 450 miles of freeway and 28 miles of light rail. Next slide. These investments have had a big impact on how our valley and the state have prospered. Our freeway network alone, made possible by the dedicated regional sales tax, saves the average motorist approximately 105 hours each year. That means more time with your family and friends doing the things you care about most. As you can see here, the vast majority of the valley's jobs are located within a mile or two of a freeway corridor or light rail. And we know how important transportation investments are to help unlock development potential, increasing property values and opportunities. A primary focus of ours is developing the next regional transportation plan, which we're calling Momentum. and planning for the extension of the dedicated sales tax to expand, improve, and optimize our region's transportation infrastructure. Next slide. Before we ask about what path you might suggest for our future, let's take a look at what our future holds if we don't continue this important transportation investment. Next slide. In our RTP scenario planning process, we took a look at what happens if the current regional sales tax, known as Proposition 400, expires in 2025 and is not renewed. The only transportation dollars left to spend are limited federal dollars and declining gas tax revenues. This limited funding would be used for ongoing operations and limited improvements to the system we have today. We did not continue the dedicated sales tax. We would not be able to build new facilities, expand our transit system, or engage in region-wide activities designed to help optimize the existing network. You can see here the outcome. By the year 2050, our region is standing still in evening rush hour congestion. Next slide. Let's take a small break and ask for your feedback through a poll. No matter what we do, our region will continue to grow, and so will congestion. What should be our top transportation strategy to address congestion in our region? Craig, will you launch the poll? We'll give you a few moments to consider this question. While we wait for you to complete the poll, I'll remind you that at any point during our presentation, if you have a question, please submit it using the Q&A feature. We'll give you another moment. All right, Craig, let's close the poll. You responded evenly to two options to provide more transportation choices and alternatives like transit, bicycle, and pedestrian improvements, and optimize and modernize our infrastructure using technology to help us move safely and efficiently. Next slide. Together, we have built a great transportation system, but to keep the Valley moving forward, we have more work to do. Our new regional transportation plan will guide how major investments in our roadway and public transit system evolve over the next 20 years and beyond. Next slide. You're playing an important role today by learning more about our future transportation options. Our policymakers are relying on feedback from you and your neighbors to help make some tough choices ahead. We've spent the better part of 2 years asking Valley residents what is most important about this community and moving around the region. And here's what we've heard: that expanding transportation choices and options, especially transit and active transportation or bicycle and pedestrian improvements, are important. That you recognize our growth will continue and will need a plan that's flexible and adaptable for an uncertain future. That preserving the investments we've already made is a priority. That safety is paramount, especially for the most vulnerable of users, like bicyclists and pedestrians, and that public health and environmental sustainability outcomes are not mutually exclusive from our transportation goals, and that our choices can work in concert to deliver a resilient future for us all. Next slide. Developing regional goals is an important step in the development of a regional plan. Our goals help set the tone of the plan, indicating priorities and areas for investment, and guiding the selection of projects to best meet regional needs. To develop the goal areas shown, MAG embarked on a multi-year effort that began with a values mapping exercise. Values mapping was an interactive experience, some of which you may have participated in, to help us understand residents' core beliefs about transportation in our region and how it impacts our quality of life. The results of this exercise were backed up by additional outreach efforts, peer agency interviews, and research, and discussions with our region's policymakers. The collaborative process of developing the goals culminated with endorsement by MAG's Regional Council. These goals are safety, mobility, responsiveness, livability, preservation, and prosperity. Next slide. Let's take a moment to hear from you again. Our challenge is to look at the year 2050 and identify solutions today for the transportation challenges we'll face 20 or 30 years from now. First, take a moment to think how old you will be in the year 2050. With that in mind, let's answer the next poll question. Craig, will you launch it? What do you think is the biggest transportation challenge facing our region over the next 20 years? I'll give you a few moments to consider this question. While we wait for you to complete this poll, please do remember to submit your questions in the Q&A feature in Zoom. We'll be answering submitted questions at the end of our presentation. We'll give you just another moment. Craig, why don't you go ahead and share the results? You'll see here yet another tie between limited transportation options and environmental impacts. Next slide. Of things we don't have a shortage of is ideas and strategies for our future. Last year, the cities, towns, counties, and Native nations in our region came together to submit different projects and programs for consideration. In total, we received over 1,500 ideas. Next slide. We use a lot of data at MAG to help us make difficult decisions. As required by federal and state law, we use this data to develop a performance-based plan. This graphic shows how, over the past year, MAG has used data to evaluate the different project and program ideas. Next slide. You can see that we're at the end of this technical part of the process, having used data and analysis to develop 4 different future scenarios. Each scenario or package of projects and programs have been evaluated to see how well it performs under a range of future conditions. using state-of-the-practice modeling, including socioeconomic land use models and an activity-based travel demand model, we were able to simulate the impacts of investments being made under each of these scenarios. Next slide. Let's talk more about the paths ahead. MAG has developed 2 scenarios, each at 2 different funding levels for a total of 4 combinations. The 2 overarching scenario philosophies are new capacity and system optimization. The new capacity scenarios seek to improve or maintain the region's mobility through the addition of new capacity, including strategic investments in new roadway and rail-based transit projects. System optimization scenarios prioritize investments in infrastructure, technology, and programs that improve or maintain the region's mobility with lower levels of investment in capacity. Ultimately, we'll end up with a plan containing projects and programs that fall somewhere between these 4 scenarios. The scenarios act as a decision support tool, helping us identify the opportunities and trade-offs associated with different types and levels of investment. Policymakers can then use this information to inform final project and program selection. Let's take some time to briefly introduce you to each scenario. Next slide. Let's first start with the scenarios depicting the different projects and programs we could deliver if we continue a half-cent sales tax for another 20 years. Next slide. The new capacity half-cent scenario aims to improve or maintain the region's mobility through the addition of new capacity, including strategic investments in new roadway and rail-based projects. Key features include investment in freeway expansion, 1 new bus rapid transit route, 3 light rail extensions, and 1 streetcar extension. Because of several large capital investments, this scenario includes the smallest investment in program areas like technology and safety. I'll give you a moment to review the information on this slide. Next slide. The system optimization half-cent scenario prioritizes investments in infrastructure, technology, and programs that improve or maintain the region's mobility without significant investment in new capacity. Key features include investments in 4 new bus rapid transit routes, 2 light rail extensions, significant investment in program areas like technology and active transportation, also known as bicycle and pedestrian investments. And of the 4 scenarios, represents the smallest investment in new and expanded freeways. I'll give you a moment to consume the information. Next slide. While we're able to construct and invest in many important transportation solutions with a continuation of a half-cent, we will continue to see congestion and mobility impacts in our future. With the additional revenue generated by a 1-cent regional tax, we can further our transportation investment portfolio. Let's see what else we could deliver if we increased our revenues. Next slide. With the additional revenue generated, the new capacity 1-cent scenario further increases the investment into fixed assets with increased funding to freeways, interchanges, and grade separations. Key features include the largest expansion in new miles of freeway of any of the 4 scenarios. It represents the largest investment in our arterial street or grid network, includes 4 proposed bus rapid transit lines, 3 light rail extensions, and 1 streetcar extension. This scenario also includes a significant investment to expand and improve regional bus service and is the only scenario to include partial funding for a potential implementation of commuter rail. I'll give you a moment to review the slide. Next slide. Finally, the system optimization half-1-cent scenario increases the investment into solutions that maximize our existing facilities. These include additional programmatic investments in intelligent transportation systems and emerging technologies, widening our existing freeways and improving arterial intersections, and delivering a diverse transit portfolio. Key features include the largest investment in transit of any of the 4 scenarios, including a robust bus rapid transit program with 6 proposed routes, 3 light rail extensions, and the largest investment to expand and improve regional bus service. This package also adds important widenings to our current freeway system and includes the largest investment in programs like active transportation, emerging technology, and transportation demand management. I'll give you a moment to review the information. Next slide. We know we've provided a lot of information to you already. This at-a-glance slide provides a very high-level summary of each of the 4 scenarios. While each scenario delivers important investments to ensure the efficient movement of people and goods throughout the region, each also contains different choices and, in many cases, different ways we can move from here to there. We're interested in hearing from you, your questions, your feedback about these tough choices ahead. Next slide. While we know there's a lot more to learn about each of these scenarios and paths ahead, we thought we'd stop here and ask for your initial reflections. Craig, would you launch the next poll? Is there a scenario you like more than others? We'll give you a few moments to consider this question. As a reminder, if you have a question, please submit it through the Q&A feature in Zoom. We'll be answering questions at the end of today's presentation. Craig, why don't you share the results? It looks like the majority of you indicated that you would prefer a combination or mix of the scenarios and projects and programs in each of these scenarios. And that is most likely what will happen. Next slide. As you can see in this graphic, this is a very important phase of our work. We need your feedback on some tough choices ahead. With input from you, our policymakers will go from these 4 scenarios to a draft plan later this summer. We'll ask for your feedback again this fall before finalizing the plan for adoption. We plan then to come back to voters as early as next November 2022 to renew the dedicated county transportation sales tax. Next slide. We appreciate that you've joined us today and encourage you to stay engaged by chatting with us online and inviting your friends and neighbors to this discussion. Our focus of this round of engagement ends on Monday, but we're encouraging you to provide additional feedback online, including for specific projects using our interactive map. Next slide. Now, we want to hear from you. If you haven't already, please submit your questions using the Q&A feature. We'll take questions one at a time. Also, please remember to visit us online at ourmomentumplan.com, where you can learn more about our scenarios and, as I mentioned, provide more feedback, including on specific projects using our interactive map. I'd like to welcome Kristen and John to this conversation. And Kristen, if you are ready to begin, let's start with the question and answer portion of today's event. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Audra, and good morning, everyone. We do have several questions, and thank you all very much for your questions. We also have received some comments during the presentation, and while we will not be reading the comments out loud, we will incorporate them into the plan. First question: how do the cities and towns' general plans coordinate with the regional transportation plan?
That is a fantastic question. We partner with our member agencies, the cities, towns, counties, and Native nations who are members of MAG, and utilize their adopted general or comprehensive plans as part of our socioeconomic analysis that including their land use decisions and using that information to inform our long-range population and employment projections. In addition, as part of our call for projects that occurred last year, cities, towns, and counties submitted potential project ideas, many of which are included in their adopted general and comprehensive plans.
Thank you, Audra. The next question will go to John. John, how will ADOT's responsibilities jive with the regional transportation plan?
Good morning. That's a good question. So MAG is responsible for the long-range transportation planning within the MAG region. As part of that, MAG is responsible for establishing the priorities and budgets for freeway projects along the system. Within the establishment of priorities, that includes establishing the projects as well as the general schedule about when those projects would occur. ADOT is then responsible for actually implementing the projects.
Thank you, John. The next question: will there be a proposition on a ballot if the sales tax is increased to 1 cent? If so, when? John?
Thank you. So as part of the process, we are required to seek voter approval regardless if we stick at a half cent or go up to 1 cent. This follows the precedent that was established in the past, both with Proposition 300 and Proposition 400. We're currently working closely with our policymakers, but tentatively do plan on going out for the ballot initiative in November of 2022.
Thank you. The next question is for Audra. Audra, what is active transportation and demand management?
Active transportation is a collection of transportation choices that are focused in the pedestrian realm, bicyclists, and other usually non-motorized modes. In this region, that also potentially includes equestrian. Transportation demand management is a set of strategies that help to optimize our current transportation system. It includes technology resources, partnerships with our business community, and other strategies that attempt to reduce our peak period or morning and evening congestion periods to fully maximize the infrastructure we have already built. We see a really bright future to expand a transportation demand management program, or TDM, region-wide, not only to improve mobility throughout the region, but also help to address some congestion mitigation issues as we start to rebuild some of the facilities in our region.
Thank you, Audra. Another question for you is, will this topic be discussed at Arizona's 34th annual statewide transit conference scheduled for November 15th through 19th of this year?
We certainly have enjoyed the audience of working with ASTA in presenting at those conferences in the past. The agenda has not yet been set to my knowledge, but we'd certainly present if invited.
Thank you. John, the next two questions will be for you. First, what are specific examples of modernized transportation?
Thank you for that question. I think a very good example that will soon be starting this summer is the I-10 Broadway Curve project. When we talk about modernizing transportation, what we're doing is looking at a combination of strategies to make traffic and people move more efficiently. So rather than just adding lanes of capacity, we're looking at the integration of technology, whether that be signal timing, or perhaps even constructing certain infrastructure like collector distributor roads that move traffic away from the main line and onto a different roadway system, or even direct high occupancy vehicle interchanges that prevent traffic from weaving and being able to make direct movements. So the I-10 Broadway Curve project will be starting this summer, and that's a great example of modernizing an area of our system that has a lot of issues today.
Thank you, John. Next question for you again is, what is entailed in the air quality conformity process?
Thank you for that question. As part of the air quality conformity process, what we will do is we will conduct an analysis of all the planned transportation investments and see what impact those have on our region's air quality. As part of that, we will make sure that those investments are within all federal air quality requirements. We will also have additional public input during that process to allow people to continue to provide input and feedback on the plan.
Thank you. Audra, will there be follow-up meetings on the transportation plan as it progresses?
Absolutely. This is just one milestone in our process. We will be working with our policymakers this summer to develop a consensus plan, as mentioned, that probably follows somewhere in between all of these scenarios. Once our policymakers reach consensus on a draft concept for a plan, we will come back out this fall and ask for additional feedback before taking it to our policymakers for adoption. This is also part of the federally required air quality conformity process.
Thank you. Audra, also, will community input close on May 24th? If someone was not able to join a virtual meeting, can they submit input by email?
Our input opportunities never close. This is just one of those concentrated moments where we have scheduled several meetings to engage with the public. As you can see on this slide, we are soliciting feedback using our website, ourmomentumplan.com, but also you can reach out to us and provide your feedback, including at the email address shown, momentum@azmag.gov. We'll be including our interactive map and scenario information on our website for the upcoming weeks, and we'll continue to solicit feedback or take your invitation to present to a group or organization that has interest. We are seeking feedback at all times and look forward to receiving it.
Thank you, Audra. John, the next question will be for you. Since MAG has proposed system optimization with a continued half-cent tax, does that mean a decision has already been made?
Thank you. So with the scenarios that were created, the intent was to show different philosophies and funding rates that could be taken as we look at trying to identify transportation investments for the future. It is likely, as we develop a final regional transportation plan, it will be a combination of all the different scenarios. We have received direction from our policymakers to start working on a plan with the half-cent optimization as the starting point. That being said, we are still considering many different elements, particularly public input from everyone as we devise what that final plan is. So no final decision has been made. Public input is a very important component of the process and will be considered as we move forward.
Thank you, John. Audra, the next two questions are for you. First, if the sales tax is increased to 1 cent for 20 years, will we be re-evaluating this again in 2050? And will the question be, should 1 cent be continued or increased for another 20 years?
So we're not even sure what the initial question will be in November of 2022. If the extension is increased to 1 cent for a term of 20 years and is approved at the ballot box, that will extend the transportation sales tax to the year 2045. In 2045 or the years preceding it, our policymakers will again come together and determine what or an extension for a transportation sales tax. I will tell you, in other parts of the country, it is not uncommon to have multiple transportation sales tax initiatives that are stacked on top of each other or have preceding durations. We don't know what our future holds, but we are focused right now on the continuation of this important sales tax initiative, and our policymakers will be saddled with that responsibility and that decision leading into this summer.
And speaking of not knowing what our future holds, Audra, the next question is, what happens if voters do not approve the sales tax in November of 2022?
Our current sales tax, Proposition 400, will expire December 31st of 2025. Current state statute requires that a ballot initiative be placed in a general election cycle, which would potentially mean we can go back to the voters for another initiative question in November of 2024.
Thank you. John, the next question is for you. Where does a grade separation of Bethany Home Road and US 60 over the BNSF Railroad fall in these plans?
Thank you. As part of our scenario planning process, we have identified a number of improvements to US 60 Grand Avenue. One of those improvements is a grade separation at US 60 and Bethany Home Road. I would encourage you to check out the Momentum website, where you can use the interactive mapping tool to see the scenarios for which that grade separation is included. As Audra had mentioned earlier, you also have an opportunity to provide project-specific feedback if there's any particular element for which you would like to convey about that project.
Thank you, John. Audra, is there a plan for a circulator for Estrella Village? This community has grown, and most stores, recreation centers, and other resources are in Maryvale. Estrella Village needs a circulator to connect them to Maryvale.
We have heard from all across the region that extending and expanding our transit network is of utmost importance. I believe this area is within the city of Phoenix, and the city of Phoenix is actually our largest transit provider in this region, as well as the legacy transit provider. A few years ago, the city of Phoenix extended their own sales tax to expand transit service throughout the city. And this particular solution would be of interest to the city of Phoenix, for which we will pass it along.
Thank you very much, Audra. And that is the last question that we have so far.
If you would like to ask us more questions, please utilize this time to submit that question using the Q&A feature. We'll be standing by. We'll give you a few more moments to consider whether or not you have another question to submit. We'll be standing by in the meantime.
I'll take a quick moment to remind everyone that we also appreciate the comments that you have posted here in the Q&A dialog box. And we will be incorporating those comments with all of the other wonderful public input that we have received.
I do not believe we've received any more questions. So I will conclude this morning's event by thanking you again for participating. Your input is important, and we appreciate that you've taken the time this morning to learn more about our options ahead. A recording of this event will be posted on ourmomentumplan.com, where, as we've said, you can continue to learn more about this work and provide your feedback. On behalf of MAG and our member agencies, thanks again for joining us this morning, and have a great rest of your day.